Those stories coming up, and we'll cross to Paris for a look at what a Macron presidency means for the future of Europe. But first, tomorrow is the Turnbull government's biggest day of the year. The federal budget, the second of Treasurer Scott Morrison, will unveil the coalition's latest economic plan and political priorities. We already know there'll be new approaches to school and university funding and Medicare, reversals from some of the old budgets of Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey. Malcolm Turnbull's break with the unpopular past will be the unspoken theme of the night, as 7:30's political correspondent Andrew Probyn reports.
The House of Treasury may not be a publisher of blockbusters, and the books it produces are, well, dreary. But budgets are nevertheless about storytelling.
Well, this is the one that brings home the bacon.
Some treasurers are born storytellers. Paul Keating was one. Peter Costello was another.
Well, if you can have children, it's a good thing to do. You should have, if you can. Not everyone can, but one for your husband and one for your wife and one for the country.
One treasurer found his story told prematurely by someone else.
Well, we don't have to wait until Tuesday night to find out what's in Mr John Howard's budget. It's been leaked.
It's disturbing that information of this kind should be leaked.
Others dabbled in fiction.
The 4 years of surpluses I announced tonight are a powerful endorsement of the strength of our economy, resilience of our people, and the success of our policies.
And some have chosen crude comparisons.
We are a nation of lifters, not leaners.
Joe Hockey's first budget may have been 3 years ago, but it's proven to have had a poisonously long half-life, with many victims along the way. His second budget in 2015 came just months after his leader Tony Abbott survived a near-death experience at the hands of his colleagues, and the pressure on both men showed. Tomorrow's budget couldn't avoid a similarly stiff, stage-managed event for the cameras.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, PM.
Thank you. Hard work ahead.
Absolutely.
We can get on with it. We will. Cheers.
The final meeting of the government's Razor Gang was ceremonial, but the themes of tomorrow's budget are becoming clear.
Above all, this budget will be a thoroughly fair budget. It is a commitment to fairness. Australians understand that. We are the nation of a fair go. It's in our DNA, and that our budget will reflect that.
In case you didn't pick it up, the F word for the 2017 budget is fairness. This might be Treasurer Scott Morrison's second budget, but it will be his first to properly deal with Joe Hockey's legacy. The two Hockey budgets, especially the first, were deemed to have failed the fairness test. Last year's budget was too close to the double dissolution election to allow a reset on Medicare, schools and university funding. That reset comes tomorrow, effectively making it the first true budget of the Turnbull government, 20 months after Tony Abbott was dumped.
The best a treasurer can hope for is that enough people get something out of it that they get away with a majority feeling it's okay. So if I don't get in...
Veteran budget watcher Stephen Bartos, a public finance expert and former high-ranking bureaucrat, says every budget is a balancing act.
The budget is a lot of things. It's an economic document, it's an accounting document, it's a statement of priorities, but above all, it's a political document, and the reason why the government puts so much time into selling the budget is it's its statement for its political future.
Malcolm Turnbull has spelled out his priorities as being fairness, opportunity and security. Can these be delivered?
Delivering all three at once is hard, because spending more on security necessarily will potentially increase debt, cutting back on fairness and long-term economic opportunities. The budget, though, has to balance all of the different competing interests. The good debt, bad debt discussion is an interesting one. If that does lead to more investment in good, productive infrastructure, that's great. It does have a sting in the tail. There's the possibility they'll use so-called good debt to finance pork barrelling, and if that happens, it'd be a political and economic disaster.
But do you think an economically successful budget and a politically successful budget can lie in the same bed?
That's their problem. The politics will often work in opposite directions from the economics. So dealing effectively with housing affordability means that house prices have to either fall a bit or stay static, and homeowners, who are the majority of voters, don't necessarily like that. So they've got a real dilemma. Some of the things that this country needs economically aren't the same as what politically is saleable.
What's the hardest word there, you think?
While the government prepares for its budget sell, Labor has tripped up with a campaign of its own.
I'm worried about jobs for our kids in the future. There are many jobs that should go to Australians first, but the Liberals and Nationals say Australians lack the skills. So those jobs are going to 457 overseas workers.
Notice anything? Anthony Albanese did.
It's a shocker of an ad. It is not the sort of ad that I want my party to be promoting.
What's wrong with it? What is it?
I think anyone who sees it will know exactly what's wrong with it.
There are many jobs that should...
With mostly white Australians in Bill Shorten's ad, the Labor left was outraged. But should Mr Shorten shoulder some responsibility for its release?
I'm not in the ad-making business. I make no apology for saying that there's been 130,000 apprenticeships cut under the Liberals, that we've had too many rorts in our 457 visa system. But I certainly think we need to encourage as much diversity as we can. I've had a look at the final production, and I think we should have had more diversity in it, and I'll be speaking to the Labor Party about that.
The gall of that man to explain to us that he was in an ad and had no idea of the content of that ad. I'm a Western Sydney MP, and in Western Sydney we have a simple phrase we call bullshit.
Thanks, everybody.
As political bombs go, this one imploded. As for the government, it will be hoping its choice of photo opportunity for a security-related budget story doesn't prove to be a metaphor for what's coming tomorrow.
One budget measure the government has already announced is a major shake-up of Australia's media laws. It's scrapping broadcast licence fees worth about $130 million a year after pleas from commercial television networks. They claim digital giants like Facebook and Google are pillaging the advertising market. But as Pat McGrath reports, the government's facing a fight in the Senate over its plan to water down rules that stop big media players from buying their competitors.
Good evening and welcome to television.
The arrival of television in Australia 61 years ago ushered in an era of mass culture. Every major moment beamed into our living rooms.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died.
For audiences and for advertisers, the TV screen reigned supreme for decades.
So I'd like to present you...
fostering a generation of cashed-up media moguls. But those days are dying fast.
Advertisers are abandoning free-to-air television, and that's largely because they're seeking digital alternatives.
The whole media world is being turned upside down by the digital revolution, and you can't go back on that.
Together, united, we'll never be defeated.
Today, in the most important week of the year for the Parliamentary Press Gallery, there's been another demonstration of the financial crisis threatening the media industry. Fairfax journalists protesting against their employer's plan to cut newsroom staff by a quarter. There's talk also of Channel 10 collapsing, another blow to the variety of content audiences get to read and watch. Now the government's promising a rescue package.
We want an Australian media that will survive and prosper. While we mightn't always like what you write, what you print, what you broadcast or what you stream, what you do is an important underpinning for the diversity and health of Australian democracy.
What's on the table is the axing of about $130 million in licence fees the TV networks pay to the government. That's particularly welcomed by the cash-strapped 10 network. But there's a much bigger change. The government's also reintroduced legislation to repeal the long-standing 2 out of 3 rule, designed to stop a media company owning TV, radio and print in one city.
That might have been arguable in 1987, before mobile phones, before the digital age. I mean, we didn't have an internet worthwhile in 1987. And the digital transition has disrupted everything.
The Communications Minister says the changes are vital if the industry is to survive.
The idea behind the abolition of the 2 out of 3 rule is to give Australian media organisations the opportunity to configure themselves in the way that best supports their viability. What we are told repeatedly by Fairfax, by News Limited, by 10, is that the abolition of that rule will create real opportunity for media organisations to better configure themselves.
They'll configure themselves by merging, by getting bigger, by getting more powerful. I mean, Mitch Fifield argued, understandably, that in the days of the internet, media diversity doesn't matter, it's catered for. And to some extent, of course, that's true. But the fact is that our agenda is still dominated by the big players, by the ABC, by Fairfax, and above all by News Corporation. And that is going to become even more true, it seems to me, with these new rules.
For audiences, that could mean less choice when it comes to traditional forms of media.
I would say without a doubt Rupert Murdoch stands to gain the most from the new rules. He can buy turn if he wants to. Certainly it will help Fox Sport to bid for more sports that it wants.
Well, I think the most important thing from those watching tonight is what it means for public interest journalism. Are we getting quality journalism? And I don't think changing these laws is going to guarantee that. Will it increase the power of Rupert Murdoch? Absolutely. I think it was no coincidence that we saw Rupert Murdoch as the intermediary between Donald Trump and Malcolm Turnbull at the meeting those two leaders had last week, one introducing the other.
The next generation of news.
Younger media consumers are already getting their news and entertainment elsewhere. For them, greater concentration is becoming less important. Megan Brownlow has crunched the numbers on how the audience is changing.
They like shorter content, we know that. They don't like to be interrupted by advertising, we know that. And generally, they like it delivered on demand.
With that choice available to the population, diversity of voices is no longer an issue and it should be off the table entirely.
The government needs crossbench support to get the measures through the Senate.
The world's biggest online sports betting company.
Nick Xenophon's still deciding whether he'll support the relaxation of the rules, despite the government offering him the carrot of voluntary restrictions on gambling ads during live televised sport before 8:30 p.m.
On the face of it, it could lead to a greater concentration of ownership unless, of course, you build in a number of safeguards. For instance, it's important that there be strong regional voices.
7:30 tonight.
Yet the shake-up does nothing to address the industry's most fundamental problem, that the TV advertising market is flatlining.
We're looking at a -1% revenue drop on average each year over the next few years. That's a -1% compound annual growth rate drop. So that is significant when you think about costs increasing, which is one half of the painful pincer movement they're experiencing.
The other half is the growing dominance of digital giants like Facebook and Google, which together are snatching an estimated 80% of new advertising revenue.
My concern is that the elephant in the room is the impact of Facebook and Google. $3.2 billion in advertising revenue they siphon away from Australian media companies, and they do it by cannibalising the content of Australian journalists.
Mitch Fifield's moves for media reform are too little too late. If he had done this a decade ago, or if the government had done it a decade ago, they might have given Australian companies a chance to compete with the global interlopers who have come in and knocked the revenue out of everybody. That's Facebook and Google.
Look, of course, there is a crisis in mainstream media, in newspapers, and in free-to-air television, but the consequences, nevertheless, are going to be even more concentration of media in one of the most media-concentrated countries in the world.